Candid camera.
I'm on Candid camera.
Oh my goodness.
Ah, there it is.
I don't have much goodness either.
All right.
We're back.
We are back. Al and I sit, and Al asks question after question after question. It's happened for years.
Of him.
Of me. And some of those questions are... You don't just... You just don't think... You just don't come up with those questions. And then when he asks them, you just sit there chewing and chewing and chewing. And this one is one of those.
So, this video is about a question I asked. And it has an answer.
So, a problem that we run into is we look all over the place for
a group of believers.
People who believe the scriptures, and that's not just people who say they believe the scriptures. That's people who it is obvious in their what they're doing in their walk that they are working at believing the scriptures. And
so what's our question?
The question is the house church movement an appendage of the traditional church?
So a lot of traditional religious churches tried to start a church by creating some sort of house church and then expanding that into a traditional church.
So when I was younger, I was in a traditional church in a pretty big building with a lot of members, and some things went on that, I don't know, they were not happy with the pastor getting drunk and all kinds of things, so they tried to get rid of him.
Nothing wrong with a drunk pastor? What's wrong with you?
I don't know, but they tried getting rid of him as a group. That a bunch of the founding members of that church tried to have him dealt with, like, stop drinking, all this stuff. And if you're not going to stop, you need to step down.
You need to step down. We don't need you.
And so the problem is that he had already moved into the position of leadership in that church, all of his friends. And so that was not going to happen. So what happened was all the people who approached and said, this is not acceptable behavior, especially one in your position, stepped down. And
they left.
And so what happened was they got put under discipline.
The ones who came and said this is not acceptable for a pastor, were now under church discipline.
And then we're all removed. And so what do those people do? They're broken people. What do? We start a house church.
That's what we do.
That's what we do. And what happened was they took exactly what was going on
in that traditional
church and they moved it into a house. And so when we talk about a house church,
or you might even call it a New Testament church.
Right.
People think they're the same, and they're not.
There's a big difference between a house church and a New Testament church.
Yes, when you move a group of traditional religious people into a house, that's a house church. Right. When a New Testament church is a church that, first of all, believes in practicing 1 Corinthians 14. That is, you can all prophesy. So, now we get into this, the traditional religious establishment has no place for you to all prophesy.
No,
there's no place for that.
No.
You can't all prophesy here. And when you assemble, each one has things from God, and each one can share things. The traditional church has no place for that. Oh, they say, well, you might be able to do that in Sunday school. The heck you will. You might do it once, and next thing you're out in the street.
I got kicked out of my Sunday school class, so I wasn't an acceptable person either. But that's not, you will not find 1 Corinthians 14 happening in the congregation or in the Sunday school classroom. It's not happening.
No, it's not happening. And then when you take that traditional religious organization, I don't care what abomination it is, and you bring part of that into a house, you just have a traditional religious establishment having a service in a house.
Yes. So what ended up happening is old farmhouse got set up. We show up there the first day. They're all trying to decide what we're going to do. They're arguing over, are we going to do it this way or that way? And what did they end up agreeing on? Set up a bunch of chairs like pews. And then we're going to try to hire a pastor to come and have a sermon.
In this house.
In the house. And they did that for a long time. They did it quite a few years. Well, then it started getting to the point, we're getting a few more people. We got to move into a building.
Yeah. We can't be a house church.
Nope. And today, they're in a building. They moved. They didn't change what they were doing. They just kind of moved it
to a different spot.
And so what it creates is another abomination. Taking the same thing that was going on, that they were all bent out of shape about when they got kicked out, and they were all arguing about how terrible that was, and we never want to have that again.
And they went right back to it.
And they went right back to it.
The dog returns to its vomit, and the sow to its mire.
And so, is the house church movement an appendage of the traditional church?
Now, I made mention in one of our other videos about a young man who was going to start a house church, and I volunteered to go to his house and start teaching the scriptures, where we study the scriptures together and find out what a house church was. But he would have none of that, because he said, I have 25 years of experience in the traditional system. Certainly I'm capable of starting a home church. And I said, that's quicksand. You're going to start a traditional church based on a house church based on the traditional system.
Not based on the scriptures.
No. I wanted to put him in the scriptures. I wanted to see what the scriptures had. But no, we're in a big hurry. We ain't got time to study the scriptures. And I'll tell you, that's something we do in this body constantly. We just finished our study on the book of John. It took 7 years.
Only 7 years.
The Gospel of John took 7 years to get through. Or maybe 4 years, because later on we went every other week on that. So, what about our meeting? I have a video, 30 years developing a New Testament church. How did ours start off? It is true. I started out with a training, a 40 years of being in the traditional religious system, and built into my mind and into my thinking was that system. So I started there.
And it's hard to bust out of that.
It's hard to break out of that. It's hard to, and Dan mentioned in the video, that God is constantly tearing out of us stuff that doesn't belong in our lives. So there's this tearing out by God of what we learn in the traditional system that isn't of God.
And we do not realize, as a general, we don't realize how ingrained tradition is in us. We talk about, ever since we made the video on the traditions of men
and the voice of God.
The voice of God, that has been a regularly reoccurring topic, because tradition is everything we do. And so the traditional religious system being ripped out of us is an ongoing thing.
Okay, when they excommunicated me from the Christian Missionary Alliance Church, they removed my person, but they didn't remove my training.
Right. Years of training.
I still had all that years of training in my mind and in my heart. I have a bachelor's degree in Bible and ministry. I had all that training, but in my mind. And when I got kicked out of the church, all that training was built into me. So all I had that. And when I finished my education there, and it took me 10 years to get. I pinched 4 years into 10. And when I got out of that, I said to the Lord, Lord, here I am. I'm ready to be used by you. And God said to me, I can't use you. And I was shocked.
What?
I was shocked.
Who goes through all of that, and then God says
10 years
no.
trying to serve God. And God said, sorry, can't use
Can't
you.
use you.
Can't use you. And I said to the Lord, why can't you use me? And he said to me, how often were you trained in listening to the voice of God in that religious training school? And I said to God, never. Never did they once encourage me to listen to what God was saying. No, I was totally 100% trained to listen to what some man thought. It's called the traditions of men. Hey, let's all listen to this man. Let's listen to this man. Let's listen to that man. So, and we'll take bits in here, a little bit from there. So that's how I started house churching, with all this crap in my mind.
And when I'm recounting of what I experienced going through a church being started in a home, when I look at that, all I see is that they took the traditions of men and the teachings of men and they moved it into a house. You cannot.
That doesn't make it biblical.
No, you cannot function with what God said in the scriptures by listening to and following the traditions of men.
You cannot have a New Testament church and not follow the New Testament. I mean, it's just not possible. So the New Testament says, when you assemble, do this.
And then at the end of that whole section says, as in all the churches.
As I recommended all the churches do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, we don't do that. But, so when you look at my video on 30 years developing a house church, a New Testament church, I had 20 years. 20 years. And it's mentioned there. I had 20 years of seeking and digging and removing and difficulties, and it was a rough 20 years because I had all this thinking in my heart and in my mind that this is how the church must be. Well, after all those years, God tore that all out of me. That's not what I said. That's not what I say. That's not what I said. This is a tradition of men. And so I became, maybe a radical.
Right.
Because now I believe God. I am a radical believer in the scriptures.
Yep. When you start bringing the scriptures to anyone that's out of the traditional system, you are radical.
You're radical.
Because they have every excuse on why they don't need to believe that. We have too many people. That was then. This is now.
Honest, that was then, and this is now really happened to him. This is not a makeup.
Yeah. This is literally talking to a pastor about asking a pastor right after a service, why don't we do what it says in 1 Corinthians 14? And he said, that was then, this is now. Everything has changed since then. We have too many people.
Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. So that was then, and this is now, is not biblical.
No, you cannot go to God and say, well, we changed what you said because times have changed. God's not going to accept that as an answer. God says, obey my voice. Do what I say. If you love me, keep my commands. Do what I say. And then we tell God we don't need to do that because that was then, this is now. So this whole movement of starting house churches and not a New Testament church, starting house churches, is just taking the teachings of men
and bringing it
into a house.
Now, I'm not saying that people who wish to begin to do a house church don't end up at becoming a a New Testament church, but I haven't found him yet.
Because it's not for lack of looking. Even for lack of offering, like Al offered to this guy. This guy says he wants to start a house church, and here's an offer to help.
You need to understand that I was willing once a week in winter and summer to go to his house and sit down one-on-one with him and study the scriptures. Not interested. Not interested in the scriptures. I'm interested in what the traditional church taught me how to do this. I'm not interested in the scriptures. And so we have a whole world of people who aren't interested in the scriptures, not interested in the voice of God, more interested in the traditions of men, and this is how we do it. And we tell God to get lost, because this is how we're going to do this. And it doesn't matter where you go with that, whether it's in the house or in a big mammoth cathedral, it's all the same.
I've been in house churches. I've been in, your traditional big old stone or brick church, and I've been in a warehouse where they have. I've been in them all.
He belongs in a warehouse.
I do. And yet they're all carrying out the same thing, just in a different
tradition
way.
of men.
So you will never find yourselves pleasing to God in that. When you directly disobey how God said to function as a church, and you go off that way, you're saying bye, and God goes bye.
I told Dan when I sat down with him and talked about the traditions of men. Well, let me assure you what the traditions of men start with. A tradition of men is that we suckle a baby. A tradition of men is that we put diapers on the baby. A tradition of men is that we train this child to eat. A tradition of men is that we send this child to school to be educated in the traditions of men. Everywhere we look, it is the traditions of men. And where is the voice of God there? It ain't. The voice of God is not in the system in which you grew up. It is not there. And so God has come into this world to speak to men. To speak to men. But he ain't going to speak based on what our traditions are. God doesn't use humans' traditions. He doesn't use the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, wisdom, to help bring his message to men. No. God speaks to all men, but he speaks by his voice, not by the traditions of men.
When a while back, I shared in our fellowship here about when I used to go to the traditional church, and what I never saw when I was doing that until hearing the voice of God was that what I would do is I would go about my week, I'd go to work, and I would use my mind to learn and carry out the things in my week. My driving, my cooking, my work.
Chasing women?
When I'd see that girl over there, she's really cute, I'd use that.
My lusting?
Oh yeah, it's all here. And anyone who's being honest would agree. The problem was, when I got to Sunday, I took that to church, and I would go sit down in the pew, and I would sing my songs, I would read the scriptures, and I'd listen to the pastor, and I'd put money in the plate, all using the same mind. And I somehow thought I could use that mind to carry out the things of God. Yet that same mind is the same mind that was lusting after that girl over there. And so when you look at that, you're taking the realm of this world, this flesh, and this mind that was cursed, and I'm going to use this cursed thing to somehow please God. This mind cannot please God.
So God says, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. It's very biblical that God wants you to have a different mind. It's the mind of the flesh and the mind of the spirit. And God wants you to have a mind of Him. Now, where can you get that mind? You get that mind by being discipled by God. How do you get discipled by God? You have a New Testament church where God speaks.
You can all prophesy. That is God speaking.
And He wants to remove this perverted old mind and let the mind of Christ enter into you. And that's a long-term process. That doesn't take 2 years or 5 years. It might take the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think we were talking just in the last week or so that it's been I think 11 years for me so far. And I can't say I'm that far along. You don't realize that the time it takes for God to undo what has happened, what you have done to it.
What Satan has built in for God to remove.
Right. So discipleship, even when we look at the disciples as just being a 3-year process of being discipled by Jesus. We don't look at the time that they spent with John the Baptist through a process of repentance.
We don't look at Peter being discipled when he had a vision.
Right.
We don't look at Paul being discipled when Peter being discipled when Paul gave him a new one.
Right. Yeah.
When
he goes, I confronted Peter.
Yeah.
And we don't look at that as discipling. We see that nope, it was 3 years following Jesus. No, it wasn't. That was a good kickstart. But their whole life was a life of being discipled by God.
Yeah. And when Paul went astray, and he did, it was because he would not let the disciples disciple him.
Yeah. He wouldn't listen to God.
He would not listen to God speaking through other men. Nope, I'm not going to listen to God who speaks through other men. When the whole majority agreed this is the voice of God, Paul said, I'm not going to do that. He got in trouble. God threw his hind end in jail because he wouldn't listen.
So God's New Testament church is for the purpose of discipling. And it is a lifelong discipling.
Okay, we are discipled to go out and make disciples. That's what Jesus said. Go into all the world, make disciples. So, and disciples means that we go into the world, we bring people in who hear the voice of God, and we disciple them, and then they go out to disciple. That is the agenda of God. That hasn't changed a bit.
In contrast to that, what the traditional system taught me was discipling was go out, find somebody, and bring them to church. And so the whole process was to get them to come to my church. When God's process of discipling is to build them up to send them out.
Bring them to God. Bring them first to hear God, where they sit and hear God, and then disciple, and then go out and make disciples. Jesus did not commission the 12 to go make disciples on the first week they followed him.
No, and definitely not to sit in a pew. I had a grandpa who was he died when he was 96, and he spent his whole life sitting on a pew. 96 years of sitting on a pew, that is not discipling. So the traditional
but they can't believe the scriptures. The scripture's pretty simple. Go and make disciples. Oh, that's for the clergy. Really? Where did it say that?
No, I don't know, but I know where it says that for the building up of the body to do the work of the ministry. And it wasn't to build up the leadership to go do the work of the ministry. It was to disciple the whole body.
I think he's quoting Ephesians 4, verse 13, 12, 13, 14, in there somewhere. You got to give me a 2-verse leeway, or a 2-chapter maybe.
I give myself a 2-book.
So let's understand, just because you're going to some quote house church, in fact, we've met people who went to house church had no idea. They went to a house church had no idea that God said the house church was to function like 1 Corinthians 14. No, they were had no idea that that's how God wanted his church to function.
Didn't even know that was there.
No.
So, complete,
But they're house churching.
Yep, complete ignorance of the scriptures. Yet, we're house churching.
No, they're not.
No.
No, they're not.
No, they are carrying out the same religious activity
As a traditional system, except they did it in a smaller space. Well, thank you for listening.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.